Hi, everyone. My name is Bryn Brown. I am actually located in Atlanta, Georgia, but I flew up here for the conference and I'm really glad I did. I've met some really amazing people and also hearing just the passion for DEI. I feel like I'm amongst community, so I'm really appreciative of that.
Awesome. So I promised I would not spring anything on her of like, now you will start speaking immediately. She's been packing up our booth. That seems a little unfair. So I'm curious if anyone here wants to share something that was surprising or different, something they didn't expect in that definition of an equity assessment.
We didn't talk so much about the equity assessment itself, but where we're missing the mark. So we talked a lot about how we're missing the mark with management training. So we have all these policies, we push the policies to the floor and we ask, do they understand and are they doing it? But does management understand? Are they doing it? And it ties back into accountability. So if the managers don't understand and they're not doing it, then they're not holding people accountable. And then the policy is basically going to waste because no one's doing it.
Yeah, I think that's a really big issue. And it's hard to hold someone accountable if they don't really understand what that policy is. Other thoughts, things that surprised you, things that have shifted?
Yeah.
I'll go. This is faster.
One thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but I think is really important, and I came to me when we were just hearing about, especially like the perception, is that I think a lot of organizations, I'll speak from the I, and what I've observed, a lot of organizations think like, oh, we did our equity assessment, check, right? And that it's not a one-time thing. And if you don't build into your outcomes, like consistent accountabilities around we're going to keep doing this, and whether it's like pulse surveys or like annual plans or whatever, then that often causes more harm, right? Because it's like, great, now people want to know and see some outcomes and know that you're going to keep looking into things. So
Yes, absolutely. We try and make it a very clear point that when we do assessments with organizations, what they plan to do with that assessment and the next steps are just as important. And the rollout of those action steps is like integral to the success, because one of the worst things you can do is ask people for their feedback and do nothing. That actually decreases morale, increases turnover, right? People are more miserable because you've asked that and you're never going to hear from them again. If you ask that information and then don't do anything with it, why would I provide it again? Any last?
Thank you. So I think we talked about the third one, especially the perception, which is so hard sometimes really to get feedback, because in any company you may have different culture, different perception, expressing differently. When I'm an immigrant or another one is a mainstream community, so hard really to get at the same level. How do you get that honesty coming at the surface?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes even just the cultural concept of feedback, like feedback itself is cultural. So whether you're supposed to tell your boss if there's something wrong is a cultural trait. That's not universal. So if you want to instill some of these practices, you really need to collaborate and think creatively about how do we build that culture, that concept together. Okay. So one of the biggest mistakes we see in our client base is that the idea is the assessment's going to be the answer. We're going to do the assessment, and we don't even know if we're ready as an organization to actually do this. What do we need to be effective? So the first thing I want to acknowledge is that change is hard, right? We call ourselves change managers. That we say this is what we do, is we help you figure out change. There's a lot of really normal rational resistance to doing this work that you have to acknowledge if you want to make a progress with your assessment. And so here are some of the things that we see most typically in terms of resistance from leadership when we start this work, when we embark on an assessment, right? This worry that DEI is about blame is a really common theme, and it's a misunderstanding, I think, about the whole point of growth and trying to make things better, is that you're just trying to find something to make us look bad. There's also the very real concern that it's an extra task, right? That, oh God, it's another thing I have to do. And the way I often explain that to people is, no, this work is the same as safety or efficiency. Do you say it's not my job to make this a safe workplace? No, it's everyone's job. It's a lens by which you do your job. It's not extra work. It's not, oh, and then I have to do safety things, and then I have to be efficient, right? It's a way of thinking about, can I do my job better? And that's what we're asking people to do, is to enhance what they're already doing and make it better. There's also the fear of exposure, right? This vulnerability. And vulnerability works in two different ways, right? There's one is that if I'm really honest, especially if the power dynamics are set against me, and when we work in these different spaces, right? We have intersectional identities that may be expressing and experiencing a lot of challenges. Asking me to be vulnerable and share, especially if you don't have an intention of acting on it, is really hard to put yourself out there and to be honest and transparent. And the other issue is if you know that you're doing something wrong. Am I going to share that honestly? Am I going to say, I don't think I'm managing my team the best way I could? I know I've had a lot of turnover here. Can I admit that and talk about it and not feel like my asking or admitting a mistake is a sign of incompetence? That you're immediately going to say, oh, well, you're not good at your job, you should be fired. Instead of saying, how do we make sure that that's better? How do we help you get better at that? There's also just a doubt that the leadership really means it, right? It's a major buy-in concern. I don't think leadership really is invested. It's a lip service. They're saying that they're going to do something, and then they don't act on it. So this assessment is just another way, it's a publicity stunt, and that fear that it's not actually genuine. And that can be a legitimate fear, but that's something you need to talk about and address openly. And the last one is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? There is a genuine sentiment among employees sometimes that I don't see anything wrong from my lens, from my seat where I'm at. Everything seems great. We're all just a great team. So why do we need this? And that inability to empathize and recognize that maybe what's great for you is not great for everyone. And if you don't address these things authentically, your organization is not going to have an effective assessment. Sabrina, is there anything you would add in terms of the resistance? And then I would love for you to talk a little bit about some of the ways we try and address it.
One of the things that I think is very common in the public sector is the fear of fault finding, right? So there's the fear of, okay, so as a city, what are we doing? As a nonprofit, what is this image? Like, how are we presenting ourselves? And publicly committing to DEI and then publicly being held accountable to it creates the fear, as opposed to thinking of it as Kate shared a lens where we're doing the work that we're already doing, but we're doing it more inclusively and we're thinking of it from an equity perspective. So that's something that I feel that we handle a lot and encounter a lot in dealing with our public sector clients. So building buy-in. This is probably one of my favorite things that I actually like to do with our clients because it's giving them the tools, although we do this from an equity perspective in our assessments, but this is how you build buy-in regardless. This is following this process, it gives you the ability to do so for anything, basically. So the first thing I like to say is transparent communication. Why are you doing what you're doing? Have we shared that? Do the people that we know need to be included. Are they there? Are they part of the conversation? Are they leading the conversation? Are they contributing to it? Do they feel like they can contribute to it? Is it a psychologically safe space for them to do so? So it's interactive and it's not a directive. I think that's probably the most important thing about number one. Number two, and it also falls into the collaborative engagement. We're looking at internal and external stakeholders, right? We all have both in some capacity. And so to make the change that we want to come from the equity assessment, we have to have the collaborative engagement. Otherwise, you're going to unintentionally leave folks out and you're going to miss areas and pockets of buy-in that could have a substantial influence on the effect of what you're trying to do. Education and awareness. I would really tie that also with transparent communication, because what are we educating folks about, right? So we're saying, hey, we're taking on this initiative. We are going to do this assessment. Great. What is an assessment? What if people don't even know what DEI is? How can they participate? When we want to collect this data, we might need to teach them. We might need to level set about what diversity is, what equity is, what inclusion is, and what it means for our organization. Because it's very difficult to get buy-in about something I don't know. And then leading by example. And you see lead and, typically might think of leadership, but leading by example is each and every single one of us. It's not just, it's HR's responsibility. How many times do we hear that when it comes to DEI, right? As HR practitioners, it's your job. And it's your job to get everyone else to fall in line when it comes to DEI. It's your job to be responsible for that. That's not true. It's all of our jobs to do this, and we lead by example. And then focusing on growth. Growth is scary. It's uncomfortable. And how do you focus on it? But by leading by example and leading with education and awareness and inclusivity in your communications and pulling all of that together, that is how you build the buy-in for your assessments and buy-in for different levels of stakeholder engagement, not just leadership, but you also need the buy-in of your individual contributors. Those are your main data points that you'll be collecting from. And I say data points because we're data-driven, not because they're not people. So I do want to point that out. But this is how you achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when it comes down to it, one of the key changes in language that we recommend is talking about areas of opportunity, areas of improvement, right? We're not trying to find out what's wrong. We're trying to find out what can be better. And yes, those can be the same thing. If you're comfortable, truly comfortable with a growth mindset, they are the same thing. You're like, these are the things we're not good at. How do we get better? But I think it's really important to help build that buy-in and foster that buy-in across your team by talking about the real intention of this, right? Which is that no matter how great we are, and we might be great at some things, we might find some strengths here. Where can we move that curve, right? Where can we improve and find those improvements? And it's a small thing, but it matters. And that vulnerability has to start with the people who have power. So leading the way, I just want to point out, also means stepping into that vulnerability space of saying, hey, I know it's not perfect. I'm acknowledging it. I'm not asking you to start talking about vulnerability in these spaces until I'm actually acknowledging that there are some problems. We have a whole workshop on power, so I'm not going to go super into that. But power dynamics are more complicated than we think. It's not just about who the boss is. Okay. The second thing that we need to talk about is the culture and the environment. And culture is hard to define because it's no one person or practice, but it is measurable. And one of the things that we do, this is our organizational impact model, which says, is your organization ready for that impact, right? That's where the impact comes from. Are they ready for change? These are the 5 elements of psychological safety and healthy cultures, inclusive and equitable cultures, that are required to facilitate true change. You need all 5. You can't have just one. And you have to seriously look at whether that exists in your organization if you want to embark on this authentically. So Sabrina, feel free to riff whenever you want on any of these topics, just jump in. Because this is something we talk about all the time. So growth is that ability to say, I made a mistake. I don't understand something. I really don't know what this means. Right? And being able to say that without a fear of repercussion. When we think about what psychological safety is, it's the ability to step into difficult conversations, to hard things, without a fear of punishment and repercussion in the workplace for that. So growth is all about being able to learn, ask questions, admit you don't know something, to step into that discomfort. Anything you to add there, Bren?
I would say with growth, when it comes to question asking, because I'm a question asker, right? And when you think of the power dynamics when asking questions, it can be seen as you're challenging the boss, right? I'm questioning your ability to do something. Actually, no, it could be I don't understand the process and I'm asking for clarity. And as a leader, you can look at that from the lens of, okay, maybe the process isn't clearly defined. Thinking and reflecting as opposed to assuming that it's insubordinate, that you're asking a question, that you're challenging my authority. I think that's I really wanted to share that about the growth.
Absolutely. Purpose is about whether or not I can see what I do every day and how it connects to the mission of the organization. Do I know what the mission of the organization is? Do I care about it? And can I see how I contribute to it? Do I feel a sense of purpose? Like when I share an idea, I feel like people are excited about it. And that is what's interesting about that is that I would say that the vast majority of our clients are what I would call purpose-driven organizations. Nonprofits, public sector, healthcare, these industries where you're in it because you care. That's what makes people stay. But if you don't have these other elements, you're leaning on this hope, and that burns people out, right? Because you're basically saying, well, you're here because you care. I don't need to make sure that your voice is heard or any of these other things because you care about the job. And so what can be interesting is to see that sometimes you'll see high dynamics in one and low in some of the other. And so the next one that's equally important and is often in tension with growth is agency, my ability to change the things I do not like and to speak up about what is wrong. So it's not my own learning and growth. It might be someone else's. It might be stepping into those uncomfortable positions where I say, this policy isn't working. We keep doing it this way. Why are we doing it this way? Can you say that freely? And so that I think those two can often be in tension with one another. When you end up with too much growth, everybody's learning, you can end up in toxic positivity where no one ever says anything bad about the company. You're always supposed to be like, they didn't mean it. What are you going to do? They didn't mean it. They're learning. And that doesn't take into account impact, right? We can mean well and still cause harm. Intention and impact are not the same. But if you end up in just a sense of agency where everyone's very comfortable calling each other out, but not necessarily giving grace to learning, then you can end up in the opposite, right? Anything you'd add? Yeah. You want to talk about process?
Of course. Director of Ops, so process is my jam. So process is one, understanding the processes and policies that are there and that they serve the need that they say they do, as well as I feel like I understand. I feel as though this is applicable to me. I feel that the processes and policies in place, they are there to benefit me as an employee as opposed to managing me. And how often do we feel that way about processes and policies? And so when I think of that, how many times do we see things, a process or a policy, and you're like, no one in my department created that. They couldn't have, right? It's not applicable. It's not feasible for me to actually utilize. But do I have the agency to speak up and say something about it? And without process, it's very difficult to have the buy-in of your employees with the trust that they believe in what you're doing as leadership or as an organization.
And we won't belabor belonging because this has been a big theme for the entire conference. But I think that it is important that people feel seen, heard, and valued for who they are, not just what they do. And all too often, especially in the workplace, what you do is who you are in an organization. It's your role and function. And seeing a person as a whole person who has other aspects of their life in a role like that is really important. And that's what we really mean here in terms of what we're assessing with belonging is, do people feel seen, heard, and valued for who they are, not just what they do and what they contribute? Any questions or comments or reactions and thoughts?
Hold on. How many people, I would like to know, raise your hand if any of these 5 terms are new to you. Is this your first time hearing any of them explained either in this way or seeing them for the first time? Okay.
Few hands.
Yeah.
So what we want you to do is you can turn to a different person at your table if you want, or the same, but we're going to have you turn once again to kind of discuss and digest this because we recognize this is a large group and we still want you to actually process this information, because what we know is when we talk at you for a long period of time, it can just disappear. So thinking about potential resistance and the culture of your workplace, how prepared do you think your organization is to embark on an equity assessment? If you think about like what is the environment right now? Do you think they're ready to start doing this work? How ready? And what might need to change to be more ready? All right, last minute to finish up. Oh, how I hate to break up a good conversation. Thank you all for coming back to the large group conversation. I don't want to cut these off. Please keep having these conversations long after the session. I apologize. And interesting. So while we're making those slides go back, I will not ask you to disclose information about your organization publicly, but I am curious if there were some concepts or ideas that really resonated, that rose to the top of your discussion that you want to highlight. So is there anyone who would be willing to share some of the things you've been thinking about in terms of those barriers and the difficulties in getting an equity assessment to really land?
At our table, we talked a lot about how the getting the buy-in from all the different players in an organization is incredibly difficult. It's like chipping away at a mountain with a toothpick. There's multiple ways that things can be. Well, so for example, I guess I would say that if, let's say, leadership, some leaders don't want to participate in this process. Or let's say the leaders that were really good at this process then leave the organization. Then you have to start again and there's so many barriers that it's very hard work, and it's an incredible process that has so many components. And I think some organizations check the box because they feel like, okay, I did it. But then the implementation takes a whole nother amount. It's like two mountains. So you have to, there's so much to it. And the intention is there, but if you got to have a lot of participation to be able to make it work. And so I think that was our impression from all. And there's some government and nonprofit and for-profit at this table. So we're all kind of seeing that same piece.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, so I have a question, and I'm sure a lot of people in the private sector are seeing this too, is that the stance on DEI and how we invest in it. And they're fighting and they're letting go of heads of diversity. And what I'm seeing at my company is that our chief people officer thinks we solved diversity. My diversity group, we did such a great job. We've solved it. It's done. So they don't need to invest anymore. And we do have some critical equity things that we need to address. So how do you get get buy-in when you're having like someone who you think should be on your side, right? Saying like, good job, you solved this, we're good.
A wonderful question. Sabrina, you want to start?
Sure thing. So that's very common, especially within the private sector. It's like, ooh, we did DEI, we hired someone to do it. Cool. Or we have affinity groups and ERGs, check the box, we're great. What I have found to be very successful in challenging that thinking is identifying the gaps and tying them back to business metrics, right? So when, for example, we don't have enough diverse talent. It's one of my favorites. We don't have enough diverse talent. Okay. Are we collecting the demographics? Are we collecting the demographics at the different stages in the hiring process? Okay. Are we looking at the trends? So then when you're coming to me saying you don't have this, or we've done a great job, actually, let's poke around a little bit. And then looking at it from the lens of making it a business case. Because I think sometimes with the DEI, it's easy to have the feeling, the passion behind it. But a lot of leadership, they're looking for the business case. How does this cut down to the bottom dollar, like the bottom line? Is this making us money? And the way that I like to connect diversity is the innovation. And that gives us the competitive advantage. Our folks, that's our competitive advantage. So hiring people would, for example, if we were to get rid of the degree requirement, what door does that open to people? And then they come in and they have different lived experiences and they provide more innovation, which a company can always capitalize on in some type of way.
Yeah, and I'll say that we've been trying to collect this data, right? Because this is the stuff you need to rattle off at people to try and persuade, unfortunately. But yeah, to double click on that, even just more, is that the studies show that diversity of representation in a room, again, people are not diverse, spaces are diverse. I know I'm speaking to a crowd who agrees with this already, but when we're looking at diverse voices, collectively together, the studies show pretty clearly that this increases innovation and flexibility, right? So thinking outside the box, divergent thinking of many possible solutions to one answer, right? And the ability to pivot, to problem solve. Those two go up in companies that have more diverse workforces. And you can actually show that and explain that. And guess what we needed during the last few years, right? We needed a lot of ideas and pivoting. And so being able to explain that case can be really helpful.
I work in higher education, and our biggest challenge is rapid turnover of leadership. In 2006, the average length of a president's term was 8.5 years. Now it's 5.9 years. So an average college or university can expect a president to be there just under 6 years. And that causes obviously instability, because with new presidents sometimes come new leadership teams, which last on average president's term. So you have continual overturning of your leadership, which makes this can make this work challenging.
Absolutely. And for those of you in the room who are in the public sector, every 4 years, every 2 years, you're seeing some changes in leadership that change a lot about the culture. Yeah, that's it. That is a real issue, because so much power can be attributed positionally, right? That a lot of those decisions can be made and unmade very quickly from the top. But you can build in infrastructure and support to try and make those changes more lasting, right? To try and exceed past just a cycle of leadership. Any last thought here before we dive into the work today?
Just briefly, one thing that we talked about in our conversation is, so you've done an equity assessment, and what now? And you have this information, what kinds of actions are you willing to take on it? What things are you willing to change? And then dealing with the resistance of people being resistant to change, the whole unspoken, that's the way we've always done things, like what then? And we had a broad mix of like public, private, nonprofit at our table.
Yeah, the what next piece. I mentioned that at the beginning, but we strongly encourage anyone who approaches us about an assessment to say, okay, but then what's your planning process? And what action steps are you communicating? What are you going to be doing about the information you get? And is it clear from the beginning that you will be doing something from this assessment? Brian, anything you'd add?
No.
All right, eager to start into the assignment here. So I do apologize. We are streaming, which I only just discovered. So my exercise does not apply to the room that's not in this room. But I will give instructions if anyone's interested in participating outside of that. For everyone else, there should be one of these worksheets on your table. There's just one. It's for the group. You have to share and collaborate. Does anyone not have a worksheet on their table? Okay. There we go. All right. So what we did was we very deliberately took a standard template of a policy. This particular policy is around parental leave. Now, this policy was taken from the SHRM website as a recommended template. And we're doing this not to indicate that there's anything wrong. I just want to be clear. This is not just like, ooh. We're doing it because this is what is standard, right? We picked a very deliberate standard to show no matter what, this is a good policy, but could it be a better policy? That's the question. So we didn't pick one that's terrible for you to look at. We picked one that's good. Now tell me how to make it better. So you have a policy on the front page. The next pages ask you to look at what does the policy say and what's missing? Who's missing in this policy? And then to think about how would I assess if this is being implemented in practice? What are the issues that might be barriers for people actually accessing this policy? And then thinking about how do we make sure that the perception is there, that people know and understand how to access this. Okay? So Bren and I are going to be wandering around and we'll be happy to stop and chat with your tables and talk about it. But this is the work we want you to do together as a team. So someone can be a scribe. You can take photos of it. We can also provide resources after. So we're going to set up a little place for you to talk to us after too. But that's the exercise. For anyone who's not in the room and doesn't have the policy, I recommend that you take one of the policies of your own. You can pull something up if you can pull it up on your phone as a policy. Or you can just discuss what you do in this practice. I'll also point out that for anyone who is doing this outside, I am going to flip through slides that will walk you through the steps in case you don't have the worksheet. Anyone with the worksheet, the steps are there. But just to have a nice visual as you go through it, I'm going to set that up for you all and I'll move it as we go so that we stay on track. it was just pointed out to me that I made a terrible assumption that everyone knew what SHRM was. So that's the Society for Human Resource Management, in case anyone's curious. So Human Resource Database, apologies. I'm sure you all may have some more policy work you could analyze. But I'd love for you to think about now, how do we assess the practice, right? How do we think about, how do we find out if it's happening in practice? And I'm going to say this like really clearly, right? So this, sometimes for this example, right? You may tell people they can take leave, but if you want a promotion, if you want to be seen as the person who's the good, successful employee, those don't take leave. Right? They don't take advantage of the holiday bonuses, those holiday travel days you give, sick days, because that's not what a good employee does. And this is where you can get into the danger, right, of culture and the culture you establish that's implicit, that isn't what the policy says. So how might you start to assess that? How would you look at, and so this is hypothetical, right? Whereas the policy you can review structurally right now, thinking about how might we start to assess, is our policy doing what we want it to do? Is it actually reaching the people who need it? Okay, so if you want to start to transition your conversation that way, you can keep talking about policy if you really want, but Okay, so for the last few minutes, you can just hypothetically talk about perception, how you might try and gauge the perception and awareness in your team. But we are going to wrap up because I want to make sure we get back together again one last time before the end of our session. So we're going to wrap up in just a few minutes. So just a few minutes if you haven't already talked about perception. All right, it is my sad duty to interrupt this dialogue and bring you all back together. So thank you so much for being part of our workshop. It sounds like you all had great conversations. I did get to hear a few of them as I went around. We do have a feedback survey because feedback matters. We actually want it and we do it. We change our presentations based on what you tell us. So please do give us this information. We also will stay around for a bit here. We closed our exhibitor booth, but we brought some of the stuff there. So we have QR codes to our website and we're happy to connect with you on LinkedIn and talk with you more about what we do. We are also doing a single conference sale of some of our quick guides, which are useful practical tools to start some of this stuff. We have one on equity assessments. So if you want to look there, we're doing a 10% deal for this conference only. It ends today. And I just wanted to let you know, as you're filling it in, that's the information if you get asked, what is this? I also wanted to point out that if any of you are Portland Chamber of Commerce members, we are going to be doing a deep dive on this topic over 2 sessions coming up. So with the chamber. So we'll take a look at some of these concepts in a little bit more depth in those sessions if people are interested. That's coming up in the next month. So any final takeaways? I want to bring this back to you all and not us. Any final takeaways as you did this work? What came up for you all? Did everybody solve all the problems? All of them. Final thoughts? Oh, what you have to say is going to be so much more interesting than me. Final thoughts? All right. If no one wants to share. Okay, got one. Thank you, Margaret.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm making a little bit of a plug. All right, so my name is Margaret Brownlee, and I worked with Kate in the organization I worked with previous did an equity audit. It was a great experience. It was my first time learning about psychological safety and the importance of that to provide feedback. And I love we had a conversation prior to this, but I love the idea of setting up your organization prior to hiring someone to do an equity audit, because if you don't, it really does set you up for failure. So having these conversations, whether that's in a DEI committee that you have or a leadership task force of whatnot, to say, we want to find ways to improve the experience for our employees. We want to make our company, our organization more inclusive. This is one way we can do this. And here's the process that we can go through. And you can even show the website and things like that. It does really help improve the experience, reduce turnover, all those good things. So thank you.